You are listening to the Gut Health Jack podcast, where we question the common narrative and explore what lies beneath the surface. I'm Jacqui, functional nutritionist, clinical herbalist, and NLP practitioner, here to help you understand your body, uncover the root causes of your symptoms, and finally feel like yourself again. If you've ever felt like you don't fit into the conventional path, if you're tired of the quick fixes and crave a more honest, holistic approach, you are in the right place. Every other week, we dive into the often overlooked layers of healing and explore practical steps to rebuild your gut from the inside out, all while reconnecting with your intuition. Let's dig in. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Gut Health Jack podcast. Today, we are going to be diving into leaky gut, digestion, and what you need to know. So leaky gut has become such a buzzword, right? I hear it all the time. People come to me and say, oh my God, I've got leaky gut. But what's the actual evidence? What's the whole story? Many of us are told that we have leaky gut. People have told us that leaky gut is, the root of all evil. So today we're going to dive into all of that. And a common mistake I actually see in my practice is people just focusing on healing the gut lining. And yes, this is such a massive piece. This is huge. And this is such a big piece to what I do in my healing practice as a gut health practitioner. But it's kind of like if you were renovating a house and you started with painting the walls. It's not the stepwise approach that you would take if you really want to have long lasting effects. So the problem with just, diving straight into using glutamine and using zinc and DGL and food sensitivity protocols and healing powders without deeper support is you're potentially wasting time, money, energy, and your ongoing symptoms may just never resolve, and you can feel lost and confused and stuck in this cycle of continuously trying to heal this leaky gut. So you could potentially still be dealing with your bloating, your constipation, your gas, your fatigue, with no real long-term relief. And this is because it's just kind of a band-aid approach. We want to really work on the north to south process of digestion, which we're going to talk about today. We want to support the whole terrain, not just patch the lining. We want to understand the fullness of the digestive cascade from the brain all the way down to the anus. So what's coming up in this episode today is what is leaky gut actually? What causes it? How do we test for it? Why only focusing on leaky gut can backfire. We're going to dive into what the 2 different types of leaky gut are and what to do instead from a really practical standpoint. And if you know me, we're not only going to talk about food and environment, we're also going to talk about how your emotions and how your stress and how your thoughts may be contributing to your leaky gut as well. Okay, so let's tuck into it. There are actual physiological steps that have to take place in the gut for digestion to work right. This isn't an optional thing. We've got to work from north to south, from brain to anus. So many people get thrown onto protocols or leaky gut programs or restrictive diets, or they're cutting out all their different foods, and they may be skipping over the basics of how the body really works. So we have to really look at this and understand that we have to make sure that digestion is just working optimally before we jump to any conclusions. So if you're trying to fix leaky gut or any immune-related issue, we have to make sure the basic steps of digestion are functioning first. So that means chewing your food properly, working on stomach acid, making sure you have pancreatic enzymes, working on the liver and bile flowing. We have to look at how well is your gut moving along, right? Your migrating motor complex and peristalsis. If there is a breakdown or a breaking point in any part of the sequence, it's going to create chronic issues like bloating, gas, food sensitivities, all the digestive things like pain, heartburn, indigestion. And this is why when people jump onto a leaky gut protocol or just cut out a bunch of foods, they just don't feel better. And this may be you, right? You've been trying all the things, except for you haven't looked at how your digestive cascade is functioning. And we can't have a healthy microbiome or integral gut lining if we don't start at the very top. So we're going to dive in now from top to tail. The digestive system is a big long tube that starts in your mouth and ends with your butt, right? Your butthole. And the thing to note is actually, yes, there's this big long tube, but before this, it starts in the brain. The minute that we see, smell, or think of food, our physiology kicks into gear, right? Our digestive secretions kick into action, right? We just think about food and we start salivating, right? We start releasing enzymes. We start releasing stomach acid and bile, and even the pancreas will start to release insulin when we think about something sweet. So just thinking about food, appreciating your food starts the digestive cascade. Saliva, right? This, you can even think about biting into a lemon. You will start to salivate. So the very initial first step in this top to tail process, we call it the north to south process, is the brain. And we have the nervous system, which is, there's two parts of the autonomic nervous system, right? So this is the automatic processes that happen without us even having to think about it. We've got the parasympathetic state where digestion is on. You've heard of it. It's the rest and digest state. And then we have the sympathetic state. That's where digestion is off. That's the fight or flight state. In an upcoming episode, I'm going to dive all into how the mind and the gut are connected. But just take note that the first step of digestion starts in the brain with this parasympathetic state. So one thing you can do is just really slow down when you're eating and calm your nervous system down so that you can switch into this rest and digest state. And then we move down to the mouth, right? This is where we actually physically start to chew and break down our food. And you can think about the whole digestive cascade as a domino effect. One step leads to the next, and then the next step leads to the following. So from the brain, we move to the mouth where we're chewing. We've got mechanical digestion. We're swallowing, which is stimulating the next step. We've got saliva in the mouth, which is starting to break down carbohydrates. We've got immunoglobulins in the mouth that are starting, priming the immune system for what's coming in. And we have taste. So if we have bitter taste, this helps secrete stomach acid. It helps to stimulate bile production. Or we have sweet, sugar. This communicates to the body to secrete insulin. Then we move to the stomach. This is where we are mechanically breaking down our food with this process called peristalsis. It's basically muscle contractions mixing and breaking up the food into smaller pieces. And we also have cells in the stomach that secrete stomach acid, also known as HCl, hydrochloric acid, which creates a beautiful and acidic environment that breaks down proteins in our food and pathogens, right? This is something that I really thought was interesting in all my studies and everything, where yes, pathogens are made of proteins and we need stomach acid to kill off the pathogens, right? It helps us break down proteins, so not only in our food, but also in infections that could be coming in. It frees up nutrients from food, kills off invaders, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and it also signals to the next step, like the pancreas and the gallbladder, to release their secretions, right? We have this domino effect happening. And then we have the stomach lining, which is covered in this beautiful mucosal, silky layer. And this is really key. The environment of your stomach needs to be acidic, and also we need to have this mucosal layer that protects the cells from the stomach acid. And so we want to always work on that mucosal layer and the environment of the stomach. Then we move down to the pancreas, where we produce digestive enzymes. And this is just breaking down a food molecule into smaller pieces. And just a little clinical pearl. Whenever I see low pancreatic enzymes on a stool test, I'm thinking what's going on northern, right? So what's going on with stomach acid and with the nervous system. But I'm also thinking, what is going on with insulin? And is this person on a really high sugar, high carb diet? Because we need the pancreas to secrete insulin and help us break down carbohydrates. So it's not only has a big role in digestion, it also has a huge role in balancing blood sugar and dealing with the sugar that you are bringing into your body. So I'm always thinking of those two things when I'm thinking of the pancreas. Then we're moving to the liver and gallbladder. So the liver's main role in digestion, it makes bile and it delivers it to the gallbladder. So the gallbladder then stores it and releases the bile into the small intestine. And so bile is so important, and I find it so overlooked, especially with things like hormones and constipation and detoxification. It's really important for breaking down our fats and fat-soluble vitamins. It helps us to emulsify the fats in our diet, break them down, and help us absorb them into the system. And it assists in also pulling out toxins from the body. So we really want a healthy liver to create healthy bile to assist us in the fat breakdown and detoxification. Now we are at the small intestine. So you can see how many steps are before this, right? We need to work from the brain all the way down to here before we start addressing leaky gut. Yes, it's important to remove certain things like stress and food sensitivities, but if you're not working from top to tail, you might just be pulling out something that's unnecessary. So in the small intestine, this is where we are absorbing our food. This is most of the absorption happens here. And normally in the small intestine, when you have an intact intestinal lining, this allows properly digested vitamins, minerals, fats, proteins, carbs into the bloodstream, right? So it's allowing stuff to come through. So this barrier between the internal and the external world that is happening at the intestinal wall, it lets the good stuff come in and keeps the bad stuff out, right? We want things to come in and absorb so we can have energy and nutrients, but we also want to keep pathogens and invaders out, right? This is where we determine from friend and foe. The intestinal lining is 1 cell thick, and it's a tightly regulated system that is modulated by molecules and proteins that keep these cells together, right? It zips up the cells, so they're really, really tight, and they're closed most of the time. There is a function where if there's a pathogen or there's a foreign invader, we have a system to open up these doorways and flush out the invaders. This is a protective and a temporary situation, but once this event has passed, we close back those tight junctions, we zip them back up, right? This is very selective. Once the event is passed, we're back to having a super strong intact border. So leaky gut or intestinal permeability is when we have a breakdown in our barrier. We have inflammation at the intestinal walls, we have this breakdown, and it's like the doors are wide open, right? The bouncer is gone at the bar. And now unwanted and larger particles of food and bacteria get into the bloodstream, and it kicks off inflammation, leading to body-wide inflammation. All sorts of symptoms can show up here, not just present in the gut. They can show up from anything from joint pain to stabbing pain in the gut to psoriasis. So it's really important to note that 70 to 80% of the body's immune system is located in the gut, with a significant amount in the small intestine. The small intestine is ready for invaders at any given time. So you can see why a leaky gut would create an environment where the immune system was super reactive and on red alert, right? High alert, because things are coming into the bloodstream that aren't supposed to be there. And if this goes long term and unchecked, we can have a harder time telling between friend or foe, and we can actually flag our own body's tissues, which is like hello autoimmunity. So if you're dealing with autoimmunity, or you're curious about this, or someone in your family has autoimmunity, it's really important to support the digestive cascade from top to tail, and especially looking at this piece because we need genetics, a trigger, and leaky gut to have autoimmunity. So if we have this open doorway at the level of the small intestine, it's an invitation for autoimmunity, and autoimmunity right now is skyrocketing. So it's really important to support this piece, support our immune system, and support our digestive cascade from top to tail. So the last piece that can happen with leaky gut is this thing called endotoxemia. So that's basically when you have dysbiosis, which is a microbiome that is more pathogenic bacteria than beneficial species, and intestinal permeability. So we've got this equation. We've got dysbiosis plus intestinal permeability, which equals LPS in the bloodstream. So let me just break that down. So we have gram-negative bacteria that are they're sort of the bad bugs, right? That can overgrow when the gut is imbalanced. We often, yes, we have some of these in a healthy gut, but we don't want them to overgrow like weeds in the garden. And these bacteria have a toxic outer layer called lipopolysaccharide, so we can call it LPS. And when these bacteria die, these microbes die, or the gut lining becomes leaky, this LPS can enter into the bloodstream. So it's okay if this LPS is in small amounts in the gut and it's pooped out. But the problem arises when the barrier is broken down and it gets into the bloodstream. This is what leads to endotoxemia. And this is where we have that low-grade chronic inflammation caused by circulating endotoxins like this LPS. And endotoxemia is connected and linked to things like fatigue, brain fog, bloating, digestive pain, hormone imbalance, chronic disease. It's linked to things like joint pain and skin issues. It's not just in the gut. It's going to be body-wide, right? Because it's in the bloodstream systemically. The last thing I'll mention as we're at the small intestine before we move on to testing is we want our food to be digested as best as it possibly can by this point in the gut, because big particles of food are a big problem when it comes to the immunity and food sensitivities. Also, it slows down the gut. So if you're dealing with things like constipation, you really want to focus on everything north of this, because things can really slow down if we have big chunks of food in the small intestine. But what can happen is if we have leaky gut and we have these foreign invaders, right, big particles of food coming into the bloodstream, the body actually reacts, the immune system reacts and sees these particles as foreign invaders and mounts an immune response. And over time, this creates food sensitivities to specific foods, and often the ones we eat regularly, right? And this immune activation, this breakdown of the wall, the foods coming in, us flagging and tagging, this can lead to things like bloating, fatigue, skin issues, brain fog, and more. So healing the gut lining can really help with food sensitivities and calm the immune system down if you're someone who's struggling with feeling like you're reacting to a bunch of different foods. So we can test for all this stuff, which is so awesome. I love getting data on the body. It really helps me and my clients just make changes, because when you see it, you can't deny the results, right? So I personally love using antibody testing when we're talking about testing for leaky gut. I personally use the wheat zoomer from a company called Vibrant Wellness. And it's really cool because it shows you what type of leaky gut you're dealing with and if LPS is part of the picture, right? Is there endotoxemia? I personally don't love serum and fecal zonulin because it can be all over the map, right? Zonulin can fluctuate day by day, hour by hour. So I like using antibody markers, which you actually just can take a little blood prick and you test it at home. You drop it onto your blood onto some paper, send it in, and then you get the results. And I just find this is the most stable and reliable and consistent way to test. And I love using the wheat zoomer because yes, it shows you if you are reacting to wheat, barley, and rye and need to be on a gluten-free diet, but it also shows what type of leaky gut. Is it happening in between the cells or is it the cells themselves? And we can also see anti-LPS. Is your body reacting and does it have an antibody response to these lipopolysaccharides? Are they in your bloodstream, right? So we can really check out what's going on with gluten, right, in the form of wheat, barley, and rye. Is your body creating antibodies to these? Is there a level of leaky gut that is through between the cells, or is it the cells themselves? And then is dysbiosis part of this, right? Is LPS coming into the bloodstream? So we've made it all the way through digestion, all the way to the colon, the large intestine, and this is home to our gut microbiome. This is where indigestible fibers and water and electrolytes and waste have made it to, right? These have all come through. We've absorbed everything that we can, and everything sort of waste and things that we cannot digest end up in the large intestine. And we do absorb a little bit of bile and some remaining electrolytes here, but mostly what happens in the colon is we are detoxifying, and the focus is on the microbes. And this is the most abundant presence of microbes in the entire body. So this remaining matter, the fiber, the resistant starches, and the polyphenols that we cannot digest with our human digestive system are then digested by these microbes, right? Bacteria, fungi, and viruses. And their waste, their poop, their byproducts actually are essential for our health, and they produce fuel for the colon cells. They produce things like vitamin K, support B vitamins. We've got butyrate, short-chain fatty acids. So this is so magical, and the microbiome has become so important in like all over all the socials. But as you can see, it took us a while to get here, right? The digestive cascade does not start with the microbiome. Yes, let's feed it fiber and feed it colorful, rich, diverse plant foods. But if we just go in thinking probiotics are going to be the end all be all that's going to heal our gut, it's just not the way it works. We need to work from north to south. So let's switch gears into where digestion goes wrong. What puts the brakes on this entire system? And we're going to walk through it north to south to see where specifically for you listening here today, where's your break, right? Where is the mistakes happening in your digestive cascade? So now you know it starts in the brain. And so if we're eating in a stressed, rushed, or distracted state, this is where it all falls off the wagon, right? So if we're thinking about leaky gut, we got to be thinking about what's going on with our nervous system, what's going on with our brain, right? If we are eating in a stressed state, and that stress state could be from anything. It could be from finances, relationships, thought patterns. It could be from us not creating boundaries. What is going on with our nervous system, and how can we switch into a calmer state, right? So issues often start at the brain, and we are going to be diving into this in such detail on this podcast. That's why half of my business is now dedicated to the nervous system, doing subconscious reprogramming, because the mindset and the nervous system are the things that kick everything into gear when we're talking about healing, digestion, and detoxification. So then, right, if the brain doesn't switch into this parasympathetic state, then the whole system is impaired, right? There's no cues for digestion, no digestive juices being secreted, right? And if we are rushing, we're often distracted and we're not going to chew our food. So, right, now we're down in the mouth. We're not chewing our food. We don't have cues from our brain to secrete saliva, right? We need saliva to start breaking down our carbohydrates, and we need it for our immune system, right? To tell the body what's coming in. So undigested food is now going into the stomach, right? Because we haven't switched into gear. We're not chewing our food. Now we have big chunks of food going into the stomach. And so there's a couple important things to note with the stomach. We need the healthy cues from the brain. We need to chew our food. We need a healthy mucosal layer, like I talked about earlier. And we need adequate stomach acid. So listen up. If you are someone who is struggling with heartburn, diarrhea, constipation, aversion to protein, food sitting like a brick in your stomach, these are all symptoms of low stomach acid. Indigestion, nausea is a big one, a lump in your throat, food sensitivities, right? So we just explained how that worked with leaky gut and food sensitivities, but it starts with low stomach acid, right? We need to be breaking down our food. Candida is another sign, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, skin inflammation, acne, tasting your meal hours after eating. If you're like burping up your food and you just feel like it's sitting there, bloating and distension after eating, low iron. This is a really big one because we need adequate stomach acid to absorb iron, and undigested food in your stool. These are all signs and symptoms of low stomach acid. So you can see why it's so important to start from top to tail. So issues with low stomach acid are the rest of digestion is not cued, right? We're not going to produce enzymes. We're not going to have that signaling for bile. We have increased pathogens now, right? Because we don't have hydrochloric acid to kill the pathogens upon contact. We have inadequate breakdown of protein, which is really big, right? Really big deal further down in the intestines. Now we have malabsorption of nutrients like minerals and calcium and iron, zinc, B12. We're unable to absorb zinc, and we need zinc in things like sodium and potassium to create stomach acid. So this is a cycle that can cause lots of depletions and imbalance. This can actually cause acid reflux. So a lot of people think of heartburn, acid reflux as too much acid, but if we have food sitting like a brick in our stomach because it's not being broken down with enough stomach acid, that food will sit in our stomach and ferment, and it will actually cause even if there's not enough acid, it'll cause a little bit of acid to go up into the esophagus and cause that warmth and discomfort. So we want to have enough stomach acid to break things down and get things moving along. A lot of trouble happens in the gut when things are sitting and putrefying. With low stomach acid, we then have our peristalsis can be off, right? The moving of things throughout the digestive system, whether it's too fast or too slow, this can be due to low stomach acid. The second piece here to the stomach is that mucosal layer, right? We need that silky, smooth mucosal layer. And if there's damage to this stomach lining due to food sensitivity with potential gut irritants like stress, right? Stress we know is catabolic and can break down our own tissues. Alcohol, if you're a big drinker, this can be damaging to the stomach lining. Glyphosate, so if you're, whether you're a farmer and or you're eating conventional produce, there's glyphosate on our foods, right? So this is damaging to the gut lining. We've got coffee on an empty stomach. This can be really harsh on stomach lining. Then we've got things like H. pylori, which is a spiral-shaped bacteria that lives in the stomach, and it can deteriorate that mucosal layer. This mucosal layer is super important to protect our cells from that acidity, right? And so without that mucosal layer, any acid in the stomach is going to be really intense. So it can cause irritation and damage. And this continues to thin the mucosal lining, and it cannot heal. So it can be really tough to heal if we have constant irritation from these irritants, and if we're constantly eating our food sensitivities and we're not looking at our stress, and if we are lacking nutrients to heal. Now we're at the pancreas. So when northern steps of digestion are off or not happening, or there's low HCl or stress present, or we're eating in a rushed state, we don't have those cues for the pancreas to secrete our digestive enzymes. And without enzymes, we are not breaking down our macronutrients, right? And we can also have a pH that's off in the digestive tract because the pancreas actually helps to adjust the pH in the environment of the gut. And so another thing that can happen is the pancreas might not have the resources and the energy and the power, because if we have a high sugar diet, this is a high demand from the pancreas to secrete insulin. And so it may not be able to produce and secrete enzymes for digestion. So if we have a super high sugar diet, this can really put a load on the pancreas. Another thing that can happen is if we have really high inflammatory load in the body, enzymes actually help us dampen down inflammation, which is so super cool. And a super hot tip is you can actually use pancreatic enzymes on an empty stomach, and it's like an anti-inflammatory. But enzymes actually help us dampen down inflammation. So if we have a high inflammatory load on the body and a high sugar diet, we might just not be producing and secreting enough enzymes for digestion. Okay, one of my favorite parts of the digestive cascade is the liver and the gallbladder. And this is because our poor livers are under such stress today, more than ever before. And we know that the main role of the liver in digestion is to make bile, right? And so our liver needs the right ingredients to make quality bile, right? So if it doesn't have the right ingredients, it's not going to make very good bile. And we need bile to do all the beautiful things we talked about previously. It's hormones, detox, digest our fats, absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. So if we have an overburdened liver, right, from environmental toxins, from blood sugar dysregulation, from inadequate nutrients, from eating crazy amounts of protein, then we're not going to have quality bile. So if we are lacking these cues from northern digestion, right, we don't have the stimulation, it's going to affect our secretion of bile. We also need adequate amounts of fat in our diet. So if we've been eating a low-fat diet, it's pretty likely that you are going to have sluggish bile, because we need that cue from fat to basically tell the body, hey, we've got fat in the system, squirt some bile into the small intestine to help me digest it. That's why when we're reintroducing fat into the diet, we need to go slow, because the body can take a little bit of time to catch up. So if we have less secretion, then we're going to have poor flow, and then we're going to have sludgy, sticky bile, right? So eating a high sugar diet, minimal bitter foods, a low fat diet, there's no signaling for the secretion of bile, which leads to sludgy, sticky bile. And the problem with stagnant, thick, sludgy, poor quality bile is it can lead to gallstones. And that makes it harder to secrete bile into the small intestine, which leads to poor fat digestion and absorption, poor nutrient assimilation of fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. And then we also have toxins that are not being excreted out of the body, right? They're being stored because we need healthy bile flow for healthy detoxification. If there is a heavy burden of environmental toxins, intake of poor quality foods, imbalanced blood sugar, and we are lacking in necessary nutrients, you will have a tired, underfed, and underfunctioning liver producing poor quality bile. If you are someone who is struggling with things like floating stools, discomfort in the sort of under the right side of the rib cage, constipation, if you have hemorrhoids, if you're dealing with nausea, hormone imbalance, struggling to lose weight, dry skin, cracked heels, if your stool can be light in color, if you have hypothyroidism, if you have trouble digesting fatty foods, and or if you have skin issues, these are all symptoms and signs related to your gallbladder and bile insufficiency. So if any of those stood out to you, it might be worth checking out what's going on with your fat digestion. And as you now know, all the steps that came before fat digestion, right? So brain, mouth, stomach, pancreas. So that takes us to the small intestine. If we've already dug really deep into the small intestine today, but if we have poor northern digestion, nutrient deficiencies, stress, gluten, food intolerances, and undigested food particles in the small intestine, this can all contribute to a small intestine that is damaged, right? The intestinal wall is damaged and irritated and can become leaky. So if we have irritation and inflammation along the gut wall because of all these things, right? Even big chunks of food down in the small intestine can cause irritation if we've got pathogens, if we've got SIBO. And note that if we have big chunks of food, this is actually what can proliferate and allow these pathogens to overgrow. Also, things like food sensitivities can damage the lining. Even, so the gut lining in the small intestine is one cell thick, remember? And when we have stress and when we are in a catabolic stress state, we can have body breakdown at the level of the gut lining, right? So it's not just big particles of food. It's also the thoughts that you're thinking. It's also the emotions you're feeling. It's also the boundaries that you're not setting for yourself. It's also the glyphosate that's coming in. It's the NSAIDs, right? It's the anti-inflammatory drugs. These damage and inflame the gut wall. And when we have a damaged microvilli, when we have damaged intestinal lining, this leads to malnutrition and impaired healing. It can also impair, we have got these enzymes that are secreted from that brush border. We're not going to be secreting these enzymes, right? And we can have pathogen overgrowth, like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where bacteria is growing where they're not supposed to be, right? This then has further impacts on the gut and can lead to bloating and heartburn and indigestion and sharp pain, because we have pain in the gut when we have distension, right? When we're bloated, it pushes against the intestinal wall and they're very sensitive to pressure. And so it can be really painful. I used to have it really bad in my lower right abdomen. Felt like someone was stabbing a knife in my gut. So if you're someone who wakes up bloated and you feel like you're so bloated that you're pregnant, this could be something that is taking place for you. Another thing is if you are eating fibers and this bloats you, so if you think of like a raw kale salad or any kind of salad and you're like, that is the thing that bloats me, something may be going on in the small intestine. And I'm going to keep reminding you, but anything that's happening further south in digestion, like in the small intestine, we have to start looking to the north, to the top. What is going down? Why is there breakdown here? It's often a result of something that is happening in the steps before it. And I'll say it again, the immune system is only programmed to recognize broken down proteins, right, into amino acids. And the undigested proteins, if you have leaky gut, can now get into the bloodstream, and this triggers an immune response, right, an inflammatory immune response. And this can lead to food reactions, right? The immune system will flag them as an antigen, right? Flag the foods as an antigen and create antibodies. And it will remember this for weeks or years, causing symptoms and inflammation when you eat that specific food, right? So food reactions, yes, they can be genetic, they can be true allergies, or they can be caused by this situation. So we can have fermentation and pathogen replication happening in the small intestine because of motility. So undigested macronutrients in the lower part of our small intestine triggers the digestive system to slow down and to allow more time for our food to digest. But this can lead to the fermentation and pathogen replication. And this presents as that bloating, gas, and discomfort, sharp pain in the gut. So I hope you're seeing a trend. Northern digestion is key here. So some small intestinal symptoms, right? If you've got dysfunction here, this again, bloating, gas, discomfort, trouble digesting fiber, food sensitivities, immune issues, autoimmunity, constipation, diarrhea, nausea, malabsorption. So if you're struggling with nutrient and nutrient deficiencies, and skin concerns. And remember, if we're talking leaky gut, this can be systemic. So it can also be things like skin issues and brain fog and joint pain. So the last stop in the digestive cascade is the large intestine. So if you have an unhealthy large intestine, we're talking an unhealthy microbiome. So a highly processed diet with high sugar, high refined carbs, and low fiber is going to feed the pathogens in the gut, right? Feed the weeds in the garden, not the beneficial species, right? So when this happens, there's more room for the pathogens to take over and set up shop. So think about the microbiome as a parking lot. So there's only so much space in the colon, right? And so if we don't feed the beneficial species and we feed the pathogens, there's only going to be so much room, right? So those pathogens are going to take over. So if we have lack of fiber, no food for the microbes, we've got then less beneficial species. This leads to dysbiosis, which is an imbalance. We're favoring the pathogens over the beneficial species. Then we have a lack of healthy metabolites, right? Those metabolites that the microbes produce when we feed them fiber, which will lead to increased inflammation because these metabolites really support inflammation. They support our metabolism. They actually, the colon cells produce serotonin, right? So we're going to have more inflammation. We're going to have decreased food for these colon cells. We're going to have low serotonin, right? Mental decline. We're going to have less peristalsis. Serotonin is really important for peristalsis and motility. So this can lead to things like constipation and diarrhea. So we have a systemic effect without beneficial bugs, right? So poor overall health. And we're going to do an episode strictly on the microbiome because it's so powerful and there's so much to learn about it. But just know today we're talking about the digestive cascade because that is what has to be in place first before we even dive into the microbiome. So now let's put it all together, right? So how and where do we start? And you guys know now we start with the nervous system, and that is a lifelong thing that we are going to be working on because it's not something that we can reset overnight, but it is something that we can support every day through the choices that we're making. I know that talking about the nervous system and the top to tail, it's not as sexy as and easy as taking a supplement. People always want to jump straight to the supplements, but we have to start with awareness, and we have to start with just being aware that we're eating, right? We're not scrolling on Instagram while we eat. We are taking 3 deep breaths while we eat. We are looking at the food on our plate and sending some gratitude out to the farmers and the hands that grew the food, right? Or raised the animals. So what are you grateful for, right? Eating in a peaceful state, sitting down, eating without distraction. This is one of the most amazing things we can do. And I hear from my clients all the time, like, holy cow, all I did was sit down and chill while I ate and my bloating's gone. Like, this happens. This is not some woo-woo shit, right? This is the real deal. This is how we actually heal our gut. And people always overlook this piece. So take this little nugget, plant this little seed in your brain to slow down while you eat. It's so effective, right? And so then we move to the mouth, right? Chew your food. Eat bitter foods. Don't slurp down smoothies and soups, right? Add some crunchy pepitas on top or add some muesli or granola on the top of your smoothie so you slow down, right? Putting our fork down between bites. So important. And another thing that I never actually mentioned, but our oral mouth, our oral microbiome, the health of our mouth is so important. If we aren't having good oral hygiene, we can have dysbiosis that is actually starting in the mouth, right? There's certain bacteria like Prevotella and H. pylori that can take up residence in the mouth. So we need to be brushing and flossing daily, even doing some oil pulling. I love tongue scraping, limiting sugar, and dealing with cavities, right? Going to the dentist and dealing with any infections that are in the mouth, or even going as far as getting some ozone therapy. Dysbiosis can actually start in the mouth. And imagine if you've got dysbiosis in the mouth and you've got low stomach acid, you're just going to swallow that straight down into your gut. So then after we've chewed our food, we've taken care of our oral microbiome, we're breathing, right? We then move to the stomach where we want to support stomach acid. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to not drink water with your meals, right? Drink water away from your meals to not dilute the stomach acid. And we can support the stomach lining by being aware that coffee on an empty tummy and having alcohol and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like Advil, ibuprofen, Aleve, these things are super irritating to the gut lining, and that's going to damage that beautiful silky layer that we need for optimal digestion and that healthy stomach environment. So we want to support stomach acid. We can also add some lemon juice or some apple cider vinegar in a little shot glass with our meals, or you can add it into your salad dressings to help the acidity of your stomach, right? Bitter rich foods, these really help kick off that stomach acid secretion. We need minerals, right? Sea salt. We need potassium-rich foods to build out our stomach acid. And I've actually created a guide for you that explains how, if you want to bring in supplementation and super helpful supportive tools for this process in the digestive cascade. So you can use something called betaine HCl. So it's not for use for everyone. It's not for use if you've got ulcers, if you've had chronic use of NSAIDs, or if you have pain with apple cider vinegar when you take it. But if you've been struggling with your digestion for a while, I really wanted to give you a resource that will help you walk through how to use betaine HCl and enzymes and potentially even bile to support this basic process from top to tail, the whole digestive cascade. So I'll link up that handout in the show notes to help you start bringing in support tools to help this process kick into gear. And sometimes, yes, we need to bring in support tools to help this get up and running while we clean up the diet, while it gives us a little bit of time and grace to support this digestive cascade from a very fundamental place. So when we're talking about supporting the pancreas, I always think about eating foods that contain enzymes like pineapple, papaya, fermented foods, avocados, kiwis, bananas, miso. And you can also bring in digestive enzymes. This is one of my favorite products, favorite tools that you can have for digestion. And in my guide, I've showed you how to bring them in. And the last thing is always support your blood sugar, right? Clean up the diet, support your blood sugar to take the load off of the pancreas. With the liver and the gallbladder, it's all about cleaning up where the toxins are coming in. Where are the toxins coming in, and how can we bring in support foods for detoxification, like high quality protein, beets, beet greens, sulfur-rich foods, and maybe just choosing the clean 15 and the dirty dozen, right? So that's a great way to start a great place to start in decreasing your chemical load. Then we can bring in certain herbs that are supportive, but it's always about starting with decreasing your toxic load. And with the gallbladder, one of the best things to do is just bring in bitter foods. So things like arugula, or if you're in Australia, rocket, dandelion, things like radicchio salads, collard greens, all the bitter greens. Citrus peel, that's quite bitter. Things like coffee, yes, it can actually help if we use it in a therapeutic way because it's a bitter, but you can't drown it out with milk and honey. Cacao, great bitter food. Bitters tincture, right? You can make yourself a bitters tincture or you can purchase one. Things like green tea, right? Bitter. Supporting the small intestine, we are always thinking about supporting northern digestion here because we need food to be broken down into smaller pieces. But we can remove our food sensitivities. Try doing a gluten-free diet. For me, this was like my gateway into this whole world. When I took out gluten, I start feeling so much better. But common ones I see is egg, gluten, soy, dairy, corn, and oats. Those are some really common ones. You can bring in some healing herbs, right? Thinking like making yourself a gut healing tea. But the biggest thing here is supporting northern digestion. And then from a lifestyle standpoint, we want to look at if you are over-exercising, that's a really big stress and can lead to catabolic state and breakdown at the gut lining. And then boundaries, right? The gut lining is literally a boundary. And one of my mentors, Erin Holt, she always brings this up where if you have leaky gut, we got to check your boundaries, right? What are the boundaries that you are breaking for yourself? What are the boundaries that you need to make, right? Just, it's interesting to check in what is going on with the boundaries in your life. It is so amazing. I've been doing a lot of boundary work in the last year to see people really respect your boundaries. If you just say what you need, it's amazing the ripple effect and the positive outcomes that happen when you set yourself up with asking for what you need. And lastly, the large intestine. So we always support northern digestion first, and also we want to get our bowels moving. So if you're constipated, we need to get your bowels moving through bringing in minerals and fiber, stress management, vitamin C, even using things like magnesium oxide to get things moving, doing some breathing and making sure you're moving your body. That's a big one. And also make sure that we're eating enough. I see this so much where people just aren't eating enough food and they're like, I'm constipated, and they just don't have anything to poop out. We can also support the microbiome by eating prebiotic fibers, right? So making an applesauce that has a skin on it. We can eat things like Jerusalem artichokes. We can have fermented foods. We can work in the garden. We can spend time outside. We can pull out sugar, right? Because we know sugar is like fertilizer for pathogens. So we, can support the microbiome in so many ways alongside supporting northern digestion. So I hope this, at least by this point, you are starting to understand the importance of the digestive cascade, working from top down, right? We have to work in these steps. And this is the process that I work with every single client. And this is the biggest mistake I see, where people have gone to so many different practitioners, doctors, specialists, this and that, and they haven't talked about the nervous system. They haven't talked about stomach acid. They haven't talked about enzymes or bile. This is literally the stuff that makes us digest our food. So if we are stepping over the digestive cascade, we are missing the whole point. So I've created this awesome digestive guide to help you start this process and I want you to have something to take away from today. You can print it out, you can get the supplements, you can start and use these tools and this concept working from north to south. Start working on your nervous system alongside, right, bringing in betaine, HCl, and enzymes and bile support nutrients. We need to always adjust and look at the lifestyle that's driving the nervous system, right? What are the stressors at play that we can pull out? What is the tack in the heel? What is the thing that is interrupting the flow? So just to recap, it is not the first step, right? Leaky gut and microbiome, not the first step of digestion. We always work from tip to tail. And I encourage you to download the digestive guide to get started on this today. In the next episode, we're going to be diving all into the mind to gut connection. And this is so fun. I love this stuff. we're going to talk all about neurolinguistic programming. We're going to share some stories about how it's helped me so much. We are going to dive into how the gut talks to the brain, right? It's not only the brain to the gut, it's also the gut to the brain. It's super, super freaking cool. So I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, please come join me on Instagram and send me a message or send me an email. I'm here. I am ready. I'm excited to take this deeper. And yeah, that's it for today. Have a wonderful, wonderful day wherever you may be, and catch you next time. If this episode lit something up within you, join me again in 2 weeks' time. Gut health doesn't have to be overwhelming. We'll unravel it here together, one episode at a time. Sign up for my newsletter with this link below to be the first to know when the next episode drops. And if someone came to mind while listening today, copy the link and share this episode if you think it could help them. Thanks for tuning in and listening to the Gut Health Jack podcast. Now get outside, have some fun, and I'll see you for the next episode.